The morning light over Burlington had the color of old pewter, cold, hard, the kind of November light that makes a man think about what he has lost and what he still might lose before the year is out. On the sidewalk in front of a small white house on Cedar Street, an old woman sat on a battered cardboard suitcase. The suitcase had belonged to her mother, and the handle had been broken for 30 years, mended now with a length of jute twine that her late husband had wound around it back in 1989. 2 cardboard boxes rested beside her. Inside those boxes was the whole of her life, or what remained of it. Her name was Adelaide Thornwood. People who had loved her called her Addie. There were not many of those people left. She was 70 years old. She wore a thin gray coat that had been a good coat once, 15 winters ago. Her hair, which had once been auburn, was now the color of birch bark in winter. Her hands folded on her lap were the hands of a woman who had worked, who had cooked 10,000 suppers and washed 20,000 dishes and held 2 babies and 1 dying man, and never once in all those years asked anyone for anything. She had $56.38 in her purse. She did not yet know that within 3 hours she would be the laughingstock of every real estate investor in Chittenden County. She did not yet know that by nightfall she would be sleeping on a floor with a family of raccoons. She did not yet know that the worst thing that had ever happened to her was in fact the beginning of everything that would matter. She only knew that the door behind her was locked, and that the locks had been changed by her own children, and that the wind coming off Lake Champlain smelled like the end of something. The story of how she got to that sidewalk begins as so many American stories do, with a man who loved her. Harlan Thornwood had been a civil engineer. He had built bridges, concrete and steelwork, mostly up and down the Champlain Valley, and once a small spans project down in the Adirondacks. He was a quiet man, the kind who measured twice and spoke once, and he had loved Adelaide from the spring of 1969 until the autumn of 2016, when the cancer in his pancreas finally finished what it had started 2 years before. They had built a life on Cedar Street, 3 bedrooms, a garden out back where Harlan grew tomatoes and Adelaide grew roses, 40 years of suppers at the same oak table, 2 children raised, fed, schooled, sent off into the world to become whatever they would become, a son named Garrett, a daughter named Camilla. Adelaide had worked 31 years as a librarian at the University of Vermont. She knew the Dewey Decimal System the way a sailor knows the stars. She had handled rare books with cotton gloves. She had taught generations of freshmen how to use the microfiche back when there was such a thing, and how to navigate the online catalog when there wasn't. She had retired in 2014 with a small pension and a sheet cake and a brass plaque that now sat in a box somewhere her children had not bothered to keep. When Harlan died, the house was paid off, free and clear. He had made sure of that before the morphine drip became permanent. On his last good afternoon, when the autumn sun came through the bedroom window the way it only does in Vermont in late September, he had taken her hand. His own hand was already lighter than it should have been. He had looked at her with eyes that knew exactly how short the time was. "Don't let anyone take this house from you, Addie," he said. "Not anyone. Promise me." She had promised him. She had broken that promise 6 months ago. It was Garrett who started it. Garrett at 45 with his Boston tan and his Italian shoes and the kind of confidence that comes from making money in commercial real estate during a boom. He had come up to Burlington for a Memorial Day weekend in May, and he had brought Camilla with him, and they had sat at her kitchen table over coffee and pumpkin bread, and they had explained that they were only trying to help. "Mom," Garrett had said, and he had the voice of a man explaining interest rates to a child, "if anything happens to you, the probate will be a nightmare. Vermont estate law, legal fees, months of hassle. We're just thinking ahead." Camilla had nodded. Camilla, a Hartford attorney, had nodded the way attorneys nod when they have already won. It's a simple quitclaim, Mom. We file it at the town clerk's office. Both our names go on the deed beside yours. That's all. You still live here. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Those were the words. Adelaide remembered them later, sitting on her cardboard suitcase, and they sounded like the words of a hunter calling a deer. She had signed, because they were her children, because she had carried them, because Garrett had been a colicky baby and she had walked him for 40 straight nights when he was 3 months old, and Camilla had broken her arm falling out of an apple tree when she was 8, and Adelaide had sat with her in the emergency room and stroked her hair while they set the bone, because love, she believed, was the one currency that did not depreciate. She had been wrong about that. She had also been wrong, she would discover, about the date. On the morning of November 3rd, 2019, the children came back. They came together this time. They came with a man in a navy blue suit and a manila folder, and the man introduced himself as a real estate agent, and Adelaide looked at her son's face and knew, in the way a woman of 70 knows things, that something had ended that she had not understood was ending. They sat in the living room where she had nursed them through chicken pox, where she had read them Charlotte's Web aloud 1 chapter a night for a whole summer, when Garrett was 9 and Camilla was 6, where Harlan had lain in a hospital bed for the last 41 days of his life, looking out the window at the maple tree he had planted in 1981. Mom, Garrett said, we've decided to sell the house. Adelaide did not speak. She watched his face. She watched Camilla's face. She watched the agent's face. She had been a librarian for 31 years. She knew how to read. The market is good right now, Camilla said. 485,000. That's an excellent number. We can use the proceeds to put you somewhere comfortable. An assisted living facility in South Burlington. Lovely place. Lovely. Whose decision was this? Adelaide asked. The silence was small, but it was not empty. Mom, Garrett said, it's not safe for you here. Alone. The furnace is 20 years old. The roof is going. We can't keep dropping everything every time you call. I haven't called either of you in 4 months. That's part of the problem, Camilla said. Adelaide looked at the agent. The agent looked at his shoes. She looked back at her son. How long, she said. How long what? How long have you been planning this? Garrett's jaw did the thing it had done when he was 12 and was caught lying about a broken window, a tiny muscle just below the ear. She had not seen it in 30 years, but she recognized it. A few weeks, he said. A few weeks, Adelaide said. She stood up. She walked to the dining room. The agent had laid his manila folder on the dining room table. She did not touch the folder. She did not have to. The corner of a document was sticking out, and on that corner was a date printed in small black letters, and the date was October 12th. October 12th was 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks before her son had told her he had been planning this. For a few weeks, the document on the table had already been signed. She turned back toward the living room. She did not pick up the folder. She did not say what she had seen. She had been married to an engineer for 47 years. She understood the difference between a confrontation she could win and an inspection she should make quietly. When do you need me out? She said. 2 weeks, Garrett said. The buyer wants it empty. November 15th. All right, Mom, Camilla said. We're not the bad guys here. We're trying to do what's best for you. Adelaide looked at her daughter for a long time. Camilla had her father's eyes, brown, almost black at the center. Harlan's eyes had been the kindest eyes Adelaide had ever seen. Get out of my house, Adelaide said, quietly, without raising her voice. All 3 of you, get out. They left. She sat in the living room until the light changed. For the next 12 days she packed in silence. She had no money to hire help and no inclination to ask for any. She sorted through 40 years of life the way a coroner sorts through evidence. Some things she kept, most things she could not keep because she had nowhere to put them. The good china that her mother had given her in 1969 went into a box for goodwill. The quilt she had hand-stitched the winter Camilla was born went into a trash bag. Harlan's tools, the ones he had loved, the ones with his initials burned into the wooden handles, she left on the workbench in the garage. She could not carry tools. She could barely carry herself. She packed 2 cardboard boxes and her mother's broken suitcase, clothes, photographs, Harlan's watch, the Hamilton he had worn every day since 1972, her mother's Bible, leather-bound, the pages soft as cotton, a small frame picture of the 4 of them at Lake Willoughby in 1986, all of them sunburned and laughing, a pair of reading glasses, a flashlight, a sewing kit, a toothbrush, a wedding ring she no longer wore because her fingers had grown too thin. That was the whole of her life. It fit in 2 boxes and a suitcase. It weighed less than her grandson, whom she had not been allowed to see since Easter. On the morning of November 15th, a moving truck came. It did not come for her. It came for the house. 2 men in coveralls began carrying her furniture out to the curb. They were polite. They did not look at her. They had been instructed, she understood, to help the lady get her things to the sidewalk. They did this. They did it quickly. By 10:30, Adelaide Thornwood was standing on the sidewalk of the only house she had known since 1979, and the door was locked behind her, and her children were not there to see her off. She had not cried, not yet. She would not cry until much later, alone, in a place where no one would see. She sat down on the cardboard suitcase. The wind off the lake came down the street and pushed her hair sideways. A jogger passed and did not look at her. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Pelletier, who had borrowed Adelaide's bunt pan in 1993 and never returned it, peered out from behind a curtain and let the curtain fall. For a long time, Adelaide simply sat. She watched her breath in the cold. She counted, without meaning to, the bricks in the chimney of the house across the way. Then she saw the newspaper. It was in the trash can at the corner of the curb, the corner of the Burlington Free Press, folded twice, sticking up out of yesterday's coffee grounds and a fast food wrapper. She did not know why she stood up. She did not know why she walked the 3 steps to the trash can. She did not know why she reached down and pulled the newspaper free. She would think later that something had moved her. Not God exactly, but something, some old part of herself, the part that had survived her mother's drinking and her first husband's death in Korea and the miscarriage in 1977 nobody but Harlan had ever known about. Some old stubborn part that had decided without consulting the rest of her that she was not finished yet. She unfolded the paper. The headline on the back of the classified section in small letters between an ad for snow tires and a notice about the Rotary Club pancake breakfast read, Chittenden County to auction condemned properties. Minimum bid $1. The auction was at 2 o'clock that afternoon at the County Administration Building, 8 blocks away. Adelaide read the notice twice. She read it a 3rd time. Then she folded the newspaper carefully and put it into the pocket of her thin gray coat. She picked up her cardboard suitcase, balanced the 2 boxes on top of it, and began to walk. She walked the 8 blocks because she had no money for a taxi and no friend to call. The suitcase wheels caught on every crack in the sidewalk. The boxes were heavy. By the time she reached the corner of Pine Street, her arms were burning and her breath was coming hard. She stopped to rest on a bench outside a coffee shop. A young woman inside the coffee shop saw her through the window and looked away. Adelaide had never felt so invisible in her life. She arrived at the County Administration Building at 1:45 in the afternoon. The building was squat brick with a flag out front and a smell of bureaucracy inside that no amount of air freshener could cover. A handwritten sign in the lobby pointed her toward the basement. Auction today, room B12. She dragged her suitcase down 2 flights of stairs because the elevator was out of service. Room B12 was a long, low room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs and a podium at the front. By the time Adelaide arrived, there were already about 30 people in the room, mostly men, mostly in their 30s and 40s, business casual, khakis and polo shirts, and the kind of soft leather jackets that men wear when they want to look like they don't care about money, but in fact care about nothing else. She found a chair in the back row. She sat down quietly. She did not take off her coat. The men in the front rows were talking loudly, comparing notes, laughing about a property someone had bought last month, the basement of which had turned out to be full of asbestos. One of them, a younger fellow with a Bluetooth thing in his ear, was telling the man next to him about a flip he had just closed in Winooski. Nobody looked at the old woman in the back row. Nobody saw her at all, except one man. He was sitting 3 rows up on the aisle. He was older than the others, mid-50s perhaps. He wore a charcoal gray suit that had not come from any store within 100 miles of Burlington, and on his left wrist there was a watch that caught the fluorescent light in a way that no department store watch ever would. The watch was a Patek Philippe. Adelaide did not know that. She only knew that the watch was the kind a man wears when he is telling the world something specific about himself. The man turned in his seat. He looked back casually, the way a man looks back when he is pretending to scan the whole room. His eyes passed over Adelaide. Then they came back. They settled on her for the smallest part of a second. Then they moved on. She did not know yet that his name was Roland Kessler. She did not know yet that he had come down from Boston that morning in a black Range Rover. She did not know yet that he had been watching the Chittenden County property auctions for nearly 2 years. She did not know yet, and she would not know for many months, that he had not come to that auction for any of the properties on the printed list. He had come for one. At precisely 2 o'clock, the auctioneer stepped up to the podium. He was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and the patient air of someone who had done this work too many times to be surprised by anything. His name printed on a placard on the podium was Howard Pickett. "All right, folks," Pickett said, "let's get started. 23 properties on the docket today. Standard rules, sold as is, no warranties, no guarantees, minimum bid $1, payment due immediately upon sale, cash, cashier's check, or money order. Are we clear?" The room murmured that it was clear. The first property went in under a minute, a commercial building on Riverside, $45,000 to a man in the second row. The second property, a vacant lot on the south side, went for $12,000. The third for $38,000. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth. Adelaide watched. She did not move. She did not raise her hand. She was learning. She had been a librarian. She knew how to learn. She watched the bidding patterns. She watched which men nodded and which men raised their hands and which men held their cards close. She watched Howard Pickett work the room with the casual rhythm of an auctioneer who had done it 1,000 times. She also watched the man with the Patek Philippe. He did not bid on the first 7 properties. He sat very still, his hands folded in his lap, and he watched the auctioneer with the attentive patience of a fisherman watching a still line. Once or twice he glanced down at a small leather notebook on his knee. He did not write anything. He only looked. The 8th property came up, a small farmhouse near Essex Junction. Bidding opened at $1 and went quickly to $22,000. The man with the Patek Philippe lifted one finger. The auctioneer caught it. Bidding went to $25,000. The man lifted his finger again. Bidding went to $28,000. The man let it pass. He did not bid again. A young investor in the third row got the property at $31,000. The man with the Patek Philippe wrote one short line in his notebook and put the pen down. Adelaide watched. He bid in the next 40 minutes on 3 more properties. He won one of them, a vacant industrial lot, for $18,050. He did not seem pleased to have won it. He seemed only to have noted it the way a man notes a transaction in a ledger. By the time they reached property 21, almost 2 hours had passed. Adelaide's back ached from the folding chair. Her hands were cold. She had only $51.38 left after the dollar she had spent on a cup of weak coffee at the lobby vending machine. She had no plan. She only had the sense growing slowly inside her, like the small flame in a wood stove that has just caught that something in this room was about to be hers if she had the courage to claim it. "All right," Howard Pickett said. "Property number 22. This one's a winner, folks." His tone made clear it was not a winner. The men in the front rows chuckled. Located at the end of Timber Ridge Road, approximately 12 miles outside city limits, structure is a single-family dwelling roughly 1,200 square feet, built circa 1870. Property has been abandoned approximately 15 years. The chuckling spread. No electricity, Pickett went on reading from his sheet. No running water, no functional septic system. Roof has significant damage, windows broken throughout, foundation issues, extensive mold. County inspector has condemned the property as uninhabitable, recommended for demolition. Access is via unpaved forestry road, not maintained in winter, no nearby neighbors. Property sits on 2.3 acres of heavily wooded land. And just to sweeten the deal, folks, the inspector reports an active family of raccoons living in what used to be the kitchen. The room laughed openly now. Howard Pickett smiled the patient smile of a man who had told this kind of joke many times before. "So," he said, "who'd like to start the bidding at $1? Oh, silence. He waited. "Come on, folks. Free dollar. A house and 2 acres of pine woods. Best raccoon condo in the county." More laughter. Still no hand. "Going once at no bid then. Going twice. We'll move on to the last property." And Adelaide's hand was halfway up before she had decided to raise it. It surprised her. The hand, as if it belonged to some other woman, a younger Adelaide, perhaps the one who had stood up in the 7th grade and told the teacher that the answer in the textbook was wrong. The one who had walked into the university library in 1983 with no degree and asked for a job and gotten one because she would not stop asking. Some old brave hand of hers had risen up, and in it was a crumpled bill, and Howard Pickett, who had been looking down at his sheet, looked up. $5, Adelaide said. The room turned. 30 heads, 30 pairs of eyes. The man with the Patek Philippe was among them. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He looked at her with a kind of quiet, focused interest, the way a hawk looks at the small movement in a field of grass. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Howard Pickett said. "Did you say $5? I did." She stood up, slowly. She was 70 years old, and her knees had not been a friend to her since 2011. She stood up because she would not say it from a chair. She had been a librarian for 31 years, and she knew the difference between speaking and being heard. $5, she said again, "is my bid." The laughter, when it came in stages. A snort first from the second row, then a chuckle from the third, then the whole room. They were not cruel men exactly. They were not laughing the way schoolboys laugh at a child who has fallen. They were laughing the way men laugh when something absurd has entered a room that takes itself very seriously, and the absurdity is so complete that there is nothing to do but laugh. "Lady," one of them called out, "do you know what you're bidding on?" "Yes," Adelaide said. "That place is a death trap. You'll freeze to death in a week." "Possibly. You're literally buying a raccoon condo." "So I understand." Howard Pickett held up his hand. Ma'am, he said, and his voice had lost the auctioneer's rhythm and taken on something gentler. I want to make sure you understand. This property is condemned. It is not habitable. There is no electricity, no water, no heat. It is 12 miles from town on a road that is not maintained. Are you certain you want to proceed? I'm certain. Anyone want to bid against the lady? Pickett said to the room. $6. Anyone? 7. Adelaide did not look at the room. She looked at Howard Pickett, but out of the corner of her eye in the periphery of her 70-year-old vision, she saw the man with the Patek Philippe move. He shifted in his seat. He picked up his small leather notebook. He flipped one page back, then another. His face, which had been calm throughout the whole auction, changed, not by much. A muscle near his mouth, a tightening at the corner of his eyes. He looked down at whatever he was reading. He looked up at Howard Pickett. He looked at Adelaide. His hand started to rise. It rose halfway. Then it stopped. He paused for perhaps 2 full seconds. 2 seconds in the silence of an auction room is a very long time. His eyes moved from Adelaide to the notebook in his lap to the file folder on the podium where Howard Pickett's auction sheet sat. Something passed across his face that Adelaide, watching, could not name. Not fear, not anger. Something more careful than that. Something calculating. His hand came down. He did not bid. Howard Pickett waited. He looked at the man with the Patek Philippe, who was a regular, who had bid on multiple properties already, who any auctioneer in his right mind would expect to bid on a piece of timberland selling for $5. The man did not bid. All right then, Howard Pickett said slowly, going once at $5, going twice, last call. The silence held. Sold, he said. Property number 22 to the lady in the back row for $5. The room burst into applause. It was the kind of applause that is also laughter. The men were clapping for the spectacle of it, for the strangeness, for the story they would tell their wives that night over dinner. The old lady who bought a raccoon house for $5. Can you believe it? Adelaide walked to the front of the room. She walked slowly because her knees ached and because she would not hurry. She unfolded her thin wallet. She took out 5 wrinkled $1 bills. She laid them on the podium in front of Howard Pickett. I'll need to see identification, Pickett said quietly, and you'll need to sign the transfer paperwork. All right. He looked at her for a moment, just looked, not unkindly. Ma'am, he said very low, are you sure? I have been more sure of less, Mr. Pickett. He smiled a small, sad smile and slid the paperwork toward her. She signed. Her hand was steady. She had not been so steady in years. Behind her, the auction continued. The 23rd property sold for $42,000. The room began to disperse. Men gathered their jackets, made phone calls, slapped each other on the back. A young investor, the same one who had bought the Essex Junction farmhouse, came up to Adelaide as she was folding her copy of the transfer papers. Look, he said, and his voice was almost gentle. I don't know what your situation is, but that place is dangerous, genuinely dangerous. The floor is rotted through. The roof has a hole the size of a card table. There's no heat, nothing. You'll get hurt, or worse. Thank you, Adelaide said. At least let me give you a ride somewhere. The shelter on Pearl Street, maybe? I have a place to go. Lady, please. I have a place to go. He looked at her. He shook his head. He walked away. She picked up her cardboard suitcase. She balanced the 2 boxes on top. She walked toward the door of room B12. She did not see the man with the Patek Philippe leaving by the side stairs. She did not see him take out a cell phone in the lobby. She did not see him make a brief call that lasted perhaps 40 seconds, during which he said only 6 words she could have heard had she been close enough. The 6 words were these: she bought it, get a car. In the parking lot of the county administration building, the wind had picked up. Adelaide stood for a moment under the gray sky and looked at the deed in her hand. Property number 22, 1847 Timber Ridge Road, filed in the name of Adelaide M. Thornwood, sole owner. She had a house. It was condemned. It was 12 miles out of town. It had a hole in the roof and a family of raccoons in the kitchen, but it was hers, and no one could take it from her. She did not yet know how she would get there. A pickup truck pulled up beside her, an old one, a Ford from sometime in the early 90s, dark green with a Vermont plate and a thin layer of road dust on every panel. The driver leaned across and rolled down the passenger window. He was a man of about 68, gray hair, gray beard, gray eyes. He wore a flannel shirt and a Carhartt jacket, and the kind of weathered face that does not come from leisure. There was a wedding band on his left hand, but it was thin and worn smooth. "Ma'am," he said, "my name's Silas Buchanan. I run the general store out at Bear Hollow. I heard there was a lady who just bought the old place on Timber Ridge." She looked at him. She did not know him. "News travels," he said simply. "In a town this size. I'm headed home. I go right past your road. I can give you a ride." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." She studied him. She had been a librarian for 31 years. She knew how to read faces. There was nothing in his face she did not trust. "Thank you," she said. "I would appreciate that." He got out of the truck. He came around. He lifted her cardboard suitcase into the bed of the pickup and her 2 boxes, and he did not ask why an old woman in a thin gray coat was carrying everything she owned into the cold. He only worked, quickly and quietly. She climbed into the passenger seat. The cab smelled of pipe tobacco and motor oil and something else, something old and clean, perhaps cedar. He shut his door. He put the truck in gear. They pulled out of the parking lot. For the first 3 miles, neither of them spoke. He drove. She watched the houses thin out, the maple trees give way to pines. The world become quieter and emptier with every passing mile. "I'm a widower," he said finally. 12 years now. Cancer." She did not turn her head. She did not need to. "My husband died of cancer too," she said. 3 years. "I'm sorry." "So am I." They did not speak again for a long time. The road climbed. The pavement ended at the 8-mile marker. They turned onto a gravel road, then onto something that was barely a road at all, just 2 tire tracks in the dirt running into the pine woods. Branches scraped the sides of the truck. The light had begun to fail. After a quarter mile, the tracks opened into a small clearing. Silas Buchanan stopped the truck. He let the engine idle. They both sat there looking. The house was worse than she had imagined. Adelaide had imagined a small cabin, weather-beaten in need of repair. What stood in the clearing was the corpse of a building. The roof sagged at the middle and gaped open at the right end where a hole the size of a kitchen table showed the darkening sky. Every window was broken, just empty frames with shards of glass clinging to rotted wood. The front door hung crooked on one hinge. The front porch had fallen in on the left side, and a young birch tree, maybe 6 feet tall, was growing up through the collapsed boards, as if the forest had already begun to take its property back. Silas let out a long breath. "That's what you bought," he said. "That's what I bought." He was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, you can't sleep there tonight. There's a motel back on Route 15. I can take you. $40 a night. I'll pay it." "No, ma'am, it's mine. I'm sleeping in it tonight." He looked at her. He looked at the house. He looked at her again. Then slowly he nodded. "All right," he said. "Then we work." For the next hour, they worked. He had a flashlight in the glove box and a tarp in the bed of his truck and a coil of rope and a hammer and a small camp lantern with batteries. He pried open the front door with a crowbar. He swept the worst of the broken glass off what had been the living room floor. He climbed onto the porch roof, the part that was still standing, and rigged the tarp over the hole in the main roof with the rope and a handful of bent nails. It would not last a winter. It would last a night. The inside of the house when she went in was worse than the outside. The smell was the first thing. Rot, mold, the ammonia of animal urine. Underneath it, the colder smell of long abandonment, of damp wood and rusted iron and rooms that have not been warmed in 15 years. The floor of the main room was littered with leaves and pine cones and the small bones of mice. There were holes in the boards where rot had eaten through. In the kitchen at the far end, she heard something move, something larger than a mouse. She turned her flashlight that way and saw on top of a leaning cupboard the green gold eyes of a mother raccoon and 3 smaller pairs beside her. "This is my house now," Adelaide said aloud to the raccoon, "but you can stay one more night." The raccoon chittered back at her. Silas almost laughed. He helped her clear a space on the floor of the main room, about 6 feet square, sweeping the worst of the debris with a pine branch. She laid out her thin coat as a ground cloth. She opened one of her cardboard boxes and took out a blanket. She set Harlan's watch and her mother's Bible on the floor beside her, the 2 most precious things she owned. "I'll come back tomorrow," Silas said. "Check on you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He set the lantern beside her. He set a bottle of water beside that. He took a $20 bill out of his wallet and pressed it into her hand before she could refuse. "For the camp store down the road. Tomorrow. It's 5 miles. Carol's place. Tell her Silas sent you." "I can't." "You can, and you will." He stood up. He looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Thornwood," he said, "forgive me for asking, but your family, is there anybody—" "No," she said. "There isn't." He nodded slowly. He did not press. "I'll be back," he said. He walked out. She heard his boots on the broken porch. She heard the truck door open and close. She heard the engine start, and the headlights swept across the broken windows of her house, and then the engine sound moved away through the trees smaller and smaller until it was gone. She was alone. She sat on her coat. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. The lantern threw a small yellow circle around her, and outside that circle was the rest of her life. She did not cry. She thought about it. She gave herself permission. She sat in the dark and she gave herself the option to cry, and she found with something like surprise that she did not want to. Crying was for a different kind of grief. This was not grief. This was something else. This was the first night of a thing she did not yet have a name for. The house creaked. The wind moved through the broken windows and into the rooms and out again like a slow tide. The raccoons in the kitchen made their small night sounds. Somewhere outside, an owl called twice. She closed her eyes. She had almost slept when she heard it. The first sound was an engine, a car engine low and well-tuned, coming up the dirt track. Not Silas's truck. Silas's truck had a knock in the second cylinder she had heard plainly on the way in. This was a different vehicle, something newer, something more expensive. She opened her eyes. The headlights swept across the broken windows, white bright, the kind of cold white that comes from new halogen bulbs. They paused. They held on the front of the house for perhaps 8 seconds. Then they moved on around the clearing slow, as if the driver were looking at every angle of the building. Then the lights moved away back down the track. Adelaide did not move. She lay very still on her coat with the blanket around her shoulders and listened. The lantern she had turned down low. From the outside, she understood now the house would look dark. Whoever was driving past would not know that the new owner was inside. The engine sound faded. She let her breath out slowly. Then 11 minutes later, by Harlan's watch, the engine came back. Slower this time. The headlights again. Across the broken windows again. The vehicle stopped this time in front of the house. The engine idled. Adelaide could hear it through the open windows. She could hear faintly the murmur of a voice inside the vehicle. Just one voice, speaking on a phone perhaps. She could not make out the words. The engine cut. For a long moment there was only the wind in the pines. Then she heard the car door open, quietly. Not the sharp slam of a man in a hurry, the careful, soft click of a man who does not want to be heard. Footsteps on the path to the house, slow, deliberate, the crunch of dry leaves and gravel. She counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then a pause, then 2 more, then a longer pause, then the sound of a boot testing the broken porch. A floorboard groaned. Adelaide reached very slowly for the cold iron poker that Silas had left propped against the wood stove. Her hand closed around it. She did not breathe. The footsteps stopped. Whoever was on the porch was now standing, perhaps 8 feet from the broken front door. He was listening. She knew it, the way prey knows a predator. He was standing very still and listening for any sound from inside. She did not move. She did not breathe. The lantern was turned so low it threw almost no light. Her body in the blanket on the coat on the floor would look to a man peering through a broken window in the dark like nothing more than another pile of debris. He stood there for what felt like a long time. Then she heard him exhale, a man's breath, slow, controlled. Then the footsteps started again, back across the porch, down the path. Each step careful, unhurried, the way a man walks when he has finished what he came to do or has decided to come back another night. The car door clicked open and clicked shut. The engine started. The headlights came on once more, swept once across the windows, and were gone. The sound of the engine moved away through the trees, smaller and smaller, and Adelaide lay in the dark, with her hand on the iron poker and her heart for the first time since she had stepped onto the sidewalk that morning beating very hard. She did not sleep that night. She watched the dark windows, and she listened for the engine to come back, and she thought of many things, but the thing she thought of most was this. She thought of a man at an auction in a charcoal gray suit and a Patek Philippe watch who had begun to bid on her house and had stopped. She thought of his hand halfway raised. She thought of what it would mean in a town this size for a man like that to take an interest in a piece of land that was supposed to be worthless. She thought too of her son Garrett, of the way his jaw had tightened on November the 3rd, of the document on the dining room table dated October the 12th. She did not yet have the answer to any of these questions, but she had the beginning of a feeling, the cold, clean, slow-building feeling that an old librarian gets when she has pulled 3 books off a shelf at random and discovered on the 3rd page of each the same unusual name. Somewhere in the dark, out beyond the broken windows of her $5 house, the owl called again. Adelaide Thornwood, 70 years old, widow disinherited, alone in a condemned cabin in the Vermont woods, tightened her grip on the iron poker and waited for morning. She would not know for many months exactly what she was waiting for, but she had already begun. Morning came gray and slow over Timber Ridge Road. Adelaide Thornwood woke with the iron poker still in her hand and her body so cold she could not at first feel her fingers. The blanket had slipped during the long hours. She had drifted in and out of something that was not quite sleep. The lantern had burned down to a low orange smolder. Through the broken windows the pine woods stood pale and stiff with the first hard frost of the year. She did not move for several minutes. She listened. There was no engine. There were no footsteps, only the wind in the pines and the distant steady chuckle of water over rocks somewhere beyond the trees. She sat up. Her back protested. Her knees did worse. She had slept on a wooden floor at 70 years old, and her body now informed her, in the specific language of pain that bodies use, that it had not approved of this decision. She set the poker down. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. She stood up slowly, the way old people stand up after a hard night, one joint at a time. She walked to the broken front door. In the gray light of morning, she examined the porch, the boards she had heard a man stand on the night before. She knelt down carefully and looked. In the soft layer of leaf dust on the porch between the rotten boards, there was a single boot print, not Silas Buchanan's. Silas had worn worn-down work boots with rounded heels. This print was sharper. The tread was crisp, deep, and clean, the kind of tread that comes off an expensive hiking boot bought at a sporting goods store in a city. She looked at the print for a long moment. She did not touch it. Then she stood up and she began to think. She had been a librarian for 31 years. She knew, perhaps better than most, the value of paying attention to small things. A misshelved book, a pencil mark in a margin, the date stamp inside the back cover that did not match the others. These were the kinds of clues that, taken alone, meant nothing. Taken together, they could tell a story. She had 3 clues now. One, a document on her dining room table dated October the 12th, 3 weeks before her son had told her he had been planning the sale for a few weeks. 2, a man in a charcoal gray suit who had raised his hand to bid on her property and then, without explanation, had not. 3, a boot print on her porch, left by a man who had come in the dark and stood listening to a condemned house in the middle of the woods. She did not yet know what story these clues were telling, but she had spent her whole working life among books, and she had learned that a story always begins to tell itself if you are patient. She turned back into the house. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. She was hungry. She was thirsty. She had $51.38 to her name, plus the 20 Silas Buchanan had pressed into her hand. There was no time now for thinking. There was only time for surviving. She set Harlan's watch beside the lantern. She squared her shoulders. She went to work. The first 3 weeks were the hardest weeks she had ever lived. She walked the 5 miles to Verna Holloway's camp store on the second morning. The road wound through pine woods and along a frozen creek and over 2 small bridges, and by the time she reached the store, her feet were numb and her hands inside her thin gloves had turned the color of milk. Verna was a woman of 55 with steel gray hair, cut short, and the practical hands of someone who had stocked her own shelves for 20 years. She looked Adelaide up and down. She did not ask questions. "Silas said you'd come," Verna said. "I've got coffee on." She poured Adelaide a cup. The coffee was bad and hot and tasted in that moment like the best thing Adelaide had ever drunk. Verna laid out the terms simply. 3 mornings a week, 5 o'clock to 8, mopping, sweeping, restocking, $15 an hour cash, plus twice a week whatever Verna had left over from the day-old shelf in the back. Bread, cheese, sometimes a tin of soup that had lost its label. "That's a kindness," Adelaide said. "That's wages," Verna said. "Don't insult me." Adelaide began that Monday. She woke at 3:30 in the dark. She dressed by the light of the lantern. She walked the 5 miles to Verna's store with a small flashlight in her pocket and Harlan's old wool scarf around her face. The walk took her 1 hour and 40 minutes. She arrived at 5. She mopped, she swept, she stocked the shelves. At 8, she walked the 5 miles home. By 10:30 in the morning, she was back at her $5 house, and she had 10 hours of daylight left, and she used every one of them. She sealed the windows first. She had no glass. She had no money for glass, but she had pine boughs, and she had clay from the bank of the creek that ran behind the property, and she had her own 2 hands, and she had what Harlan, dead 3 years now, had taught her on long Vermont winter evenings about the difference between insulation and weatherization, and about how a wall that breathed was not the same as a wall that bled. She wove tight panels of green branches. She mixed clay with creek water and dry pine needles in an old metal bucket Silas had brought. She packed the mixture with her bare hands into and around the woven panels. She built 6 window panels over 3 weeks. They were not pretty, they were not transparent, but the wind that had been moving through her house like a knife stopped moving through her house, and the difference was the difference between cold and dying. She patched the roof next. She climbed onto the porch roof on a Tuesday afternoon, and from there onto the main roof. She moved slowly because she was 70, and because a fall would be the end. She gathered pine boughs by the hundred and laid them like shingles overlapping, weighted with stones tied down with twine she bought from Verna. The natural pitch in the pine bound the layers and made them shed water. She found the hole the size of a card table at the right end of the roof, and she filled it branch by branch until she could no longer see the sky through it. The first rain came on the 4th of December. She stood inside her house with the lantern lit and waited. 3 small leaks appeared in 3 places. She marked each with a piece of red yarn from her sewing kit. The next day she climbed back onto the roof and patched each one. The next rain 2 days later, no leak appeared at all. She thought of Harlan. She thought of him often while she worked. She thought of how he would have laughed if he had seen her, his Adelaide, the librarian, the rose grower, the woman who had once written a strongly worded letter to the editor of the Free Press about decorum at city council meetings. His Adelaide now mortaring stones into a rotten floor with a homemade adobe of creek clay and grass. She thought he would not have laughed at all, in fact. She thought he would have stood and watched her work, and at the end of the day, he would have laid one of his quiet, careful hands on her shoulder and said, "That's good work, Addie. That's real good." She missed him in those weeks the way a woman misses oxygen. She kept working. Silas Buchanan came every Saturday. He never came empty-handed. The first Saturday, he brought an old kerosene lamp he said he could not use. The second, he brought a wool blanket heavy and army green that he said had been in his garage for 15 years. The third, he brought a small camp stove and 3 canisters of propane and a cast iron skillet he claimed was bothering him by sitting unused in his pantry. He brought these things with the same casual indifference a man uses to bring a friend a 6-pack, and Adelaide accepted them with the same dignity a friend uses when a 6-pack is offered. They did not speak much. They did not have to. One Saturday in early December, Silas brought a battery-powered radio and a tin of tea. "There's news from town," he said. She put a kettle of creek water on the camp stove. "Tell me," she said. "Fellow came by my store. Thursday, out-of-state plates, Massachusetts. He asked questions about you." She did not turn around. She set out 2 tin cups. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, how often I see you, whether you have family in town, whether anyone's helping you out, whether you've taken up with anybody at all. What did you tell him? That I don't gossip about my customers. What did he look like? Mid-50s, charcoal gray suit, the kind of haircut you don't get in Burlington. A watch I couldn't have bought with a year's profit." Adelaide poured the tea. "His name's Roland Kessler," Silas said. "I asked around after he left. He owns a development company, Heritage Land Partners, office out of Boston, but he's been buying up parcels in this part of the state for almost 2 years, mostly through Shell LLCs, mostly cheap, mostly remote. How many parcels? That I could find on the town records 11, all within 4 miles of where we're sitting." She set the cup in front of him. She sat down across from him on the crate she had been using as a chair. She wrapped her hands around her own cup and felt the heat move into her fingers. "He was at the auction," she said. "He started to bid on this property. He stopped." Silas nodded slowly. He had figured that out already. She could see it in his face. "Mrs. Thornwood," he said, "I don't want to alarm you, but the night you moved in, the night you said a vehicle came up the road twice. Yes, that wasn't somebody lost, wasn't a hunter, wasn't a neighbor. There aren't any neighbors out here." "I know." He drank his tea. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You ought to think about this carefully," he said. "Whatever's going on, whatever he wants from this piece of land, you ought to think about it." "I am thinking about it." "All right." He set the cup down. "I just wanted you to have the name," he said. "Roland Kessler, Heritage Land Partners." She wrote the name down that evening in a small notebook she had bought from Verna for 90 cents. She wrote it carefully in the careful block letters of a woman who had once cataloged 10,000 books a year. She underlined it once. She did not yet know what to do with the name, but the librarian in her had a place for it now. Roland Kessler came on a Tuesday. It was the 11th of December. The cold had deepened in the last week. The creek behind the property had begun to ice at the edges. Adelaide was on her hands and knees mortaring a flat creek stone into the kitchen floor where one of the boards had finally given up when she heard the engine. She knew it before she saw it. She set down her trowel. She wiped her hands on her apron. She stood up slowly and went to the front of the house and stepped out onto the porch she had spent 2 weeks rebuilding board by board. A black Range Rover was pulling into her clearing. It stopped 20 feet from the porch. The engine cut. A man got out. He was wearing the charcoal gray suit she remembered, and over it now a long camel overcoat, and on his wrist the same Patek Philippe watch. He shut the door of the Range Rover with the same soft, careful click she had heard in the dark 3 weeks before. He smiled. It was a businessman's smile, the kind of smile a man wears when he has come to do you a favor that is actually a favor to himself. "Mrs. Thornwood," he said, "my name is Roland Kessler. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time." She did not invite him in. She stood on her porch in her apron with creek clay drying on her fingernails and looked down at him. "I know who you are, Mr. Kessler." That stopped him. Only for a second. He recovered well. She would have to remember that. "Then you know I'm in the development business," he said. "I'll come straight to the point. I'd like to make you an offer on this property." "I'm not selling." "Mrs. Thornwood, please hear me out. I'm prepared to offer $75,000. Cash. Closing within 10 days. No realtor fees, no closing costs on your side. You could be in a heated apartment in Burlington by the end of the month." He said the figure the way a man says a figure he expects to settle a matter. $75,000 for a property the county had auctioned for $1 minimum bid. $75,000 for a condemned house with a hole in the roof and raccoons in the kitchen. $75,000 from a man who had not 3 weeks before been willing to bid 6. "That's a generous offer," she said. "It is, for a property that's worthless." His smile did not move, but his eyes did, just a fraction. "Mrs. Thornwood, 2.3 acres of timberland. The right buyer always exists. I'm that buyer. There's no mystery here." "There isn't." "No." "Then why didn't you bid against me at the auction, Mr. Kessler?" "You started to. I saw your hand." He paused. He took it well. He had probably negotiated through worse. "I made a different judgment at the time." "What changed?" "Nothing's changed. I've simply had 3 weeks to reflect on what a fair offer would be." She did not move from the porch. He did not move from the gravel. Between them, the cold air sat very still. "I'm not selling, Mr. Kessler." "Mrs. Thornwood, with respect, you're 70 years old, you're living in a condemned structure, and winter has not yet truly begun. I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this with money in the bank." "I am not walking away from anything." He looked at her for a long moment. She saw very briefly the calculation pass behind his eyes again the same way she had seen it at the auction. Then he produced a business card from an inside pocket and laid it on the porch railing. "Think about it," he said. "The offer stands until the new year." He got back into the Range Rover. He turned around in her clearing. He drove away. She did not pick up the card. She walked back into her house and closed the door. She finished mortaring the kitchen floor. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. Outside, the business card lay on the railing where he had left it, and the wind around dusk lifted it once and dropped it back, and that was where it stayed until Silas Buchanan on his next visit saw it and asked her about it. She told him everything. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he sat for a while looking into the fire she had built in the rebuilt wood stove. "He's not going to stop, Adelaide," he said. It was the first time he had called her by her first name. "I know. What do you want to do?" She thought about it. "I want to wait," she said. "Wait for what?" "For him to make a mistake." Silas looked at her. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then we wait." The storm came on the 18th of December. It had not been forecast, or rather, it had been forecast as a 4-inch event, the kind of snow that Vermont eats for breakfast. What arrived instead was the worst nor'easter to hit the Champlain Valley in 11 years. 18 inches of snow fell between 3 in the afternoon and midnight, driven on a wind that gusted to 55 miles an hour. The temperature dropped to 18 below zero by 10 o'clock at night. Adelaide had banked the wood stove. She had a pile of split pine she had been gathering for 6 weeks. She had her army green wool blanket and her tin of tea and her lantern, and she had begun to believe in the small, confident way of a woman who has not yet been tested that she had built a house that would hold. The wind hit the roof at 9 o'clock. She heard the sound before she felt the cold, a long rending crack like the snap of a great bone somewhere above her head. She looked up just in time to see a section of her pine bough roofing 3 feet by 4 feet lift like the lid of a box and tear loose into the night. Snow began to pour through the hole. The fire in the wood stove flickered, found new air surge for one moment, then began to die as the cold and the wind drove down through the open ceiling. Adelaide did not panic. She had been trained by 31 years among the books not to panic. She moved. She dragged her mattress, the pine bough mattress she had built on her crude wooden frame, into the back corner of the main room, the corner farthest from the hole. She piled the army blanket and her coat and every piece of clothing she owned on top of the mattress. She dragged the wood stove sideways, scorching the floor she had so carefully repaired until its small remaining heat was directed into the back corner. She climbed under the pile of cloth. The wind kept blowing. The hole kept growing. Snow drifted into the main room. By midnight, the temperature inside her house was probably 10 degrees Fahrenheit. By 2 in the morning, it was lower. She knew with the small, clear knowing of a person who has read about hypothermia in the World Almanac that she was in trouble. She also knew that the road was unpassable, that her cell phone had no signal, would have had no signal in the best of weather, and that the lantern's batteries had begun to fade an hour before. She lay under the pile of cloth, and she felt the cold press in on her. She felt her shivering begin, and then after a long time stop. She knew the stopping was not a good sign. She knew it was the thing they warned about in the almanac. She felt very tired. She thought of Harlan. She thought of her mother. She thought of Garrett, age 4, in the bath, splashing. At some point she stopped thinking at all. She did not hear the engine. She did not hear the bootsteps on the porch. She did not hear Silas Buchanan curse the storm and pound on her broken door at 5:30 in the morning, then push it open against a drift of snow that had blown into her house and was beginning in the corner near the hole to gather into a small, soft hill. She did not hear him say her name. She felt his hands on her shoulders. She felt him lift her, half carrying her, and she felt herself wrapped in something thick and dry, and she felt the lurch of being carried out of her house into a cold that was somehow even more terrible than the cold she had been losing herself to, and she felt the cab of his pickup truck, hot smelling of motor oil and pipe tobacco, and the heat hit her face like a slap, and she came back into the world. She was alive. She did not know yet that she had been 12 minutes from not being. Silas drove her to his own house. He carried her in. He laid her on the couch in front of his wood stove. He covered her in 3 quilts, and he made her drink in slow, careful sips a cup of warm broth from a thermos he kept on the counter for hunting mornings. He did not speak. He did not lecture her. He worked. By noon, the color had come back into her hands. By 2, she could stand. By 4, she had eaten a small bowl of stew and was sitting up at his kitchen table. He looked at her across the table. "Adelaide," he said, "I want to tell you something." "All right. This morning, when I pulled into your clearing, I saw something I want you to know about." She set down her spoon. The storm covered everything, the whole place, 18 inches at least, but the wind had drifted the snow in odd patterns the way it does in pines. And when I came up the track, I saw in the snow a set of tire tracks, not mine. She waited. They came in late, Adelaide, after the storm started, after it was bad. Whoever it was, he was driving something with all-wheel drive. He came up to within 50 feet of your house. He stopped. He sat there with the engine running. The tracks in the snow showed it. He sat there for at least 10 minutes by the depth of the spin-out where he turned around, and then he drove away. Her hands had grown very still on the table. "He didn't get out," Silas said. "He didn't come to the door. He didn't check. He sat there with his headlights on your house in the worst storm in 11 years, and then he drove home." She did not speak for a long time. "He came to see if I was dead," she said. "That's what it looked like to me. And he left because he wasn't sure. That's what it looked like." She closed her eyes. She thought of the boot print on her porch on the morning after the first night. She thought of Roland Kessler's smile. She thought of $75,000 offered for a piece of timberland the county had been ready to give away for free. She thought of her own son. She thought of the document dated October the 12th. Some part of the picture was beginning to take shape. Not all of it, not yet, but the outline was there now, the way the outline of a face begins to emerge from a fogged glass when a person stands close and breathes against it. "I want to go back," she said. Silas looked at her. "Adelaide, I want to go back, today. The roof is open. You'll freeze before nightfall. Then I'll patch it before nightfall." He looked at her for a long time. Then he sighed, the sigh of a man who had married a stubborn woman 35 years before and had learned that some arguments were not worth having. "All right," he said, "then I'm going to help you." They worked for 6 hours. Silas brought 2 rolls of heavy black plastic sheeting from his store and 20 pounds of roofing nails and a real ladder and a real hammer. Together they tore down what was left of the pine bough patch on the right end of the roof. Together they laid the plastic in 3 overlapping sheets across the open span. Together they weighted the edges with stones, and they nailed the corners through battens of scrap lumber, and by the time the sun was setting on the 19th of December, the roof of Adelaide Thornwood's house was for the first time since 2004 completely closed against the sky. It was inside while they were finishing the patch that she saw it. She had been on the floor of the main room, holding a board steady for Silas to nail from above. She had been looking up at the underside of the new patch, checking the seams. From this angle, lying on her back, looking up at her own ceiling, she saw what she had not seen in nearly 2 months of looking at this ceiling from below. One section of the ceiling boards near the center of the room was different from the others. The other boards were dark water-stained, warped at their ends. This section, perhaps 3 feet square, was cleaner. The wood was lighter. The grain was sharper, as if these particular boards had been protected somehow from the long, slow decay that had eaten the rest of the house. She did not say anything to Silas, not then. She finished the work. She thanked him. She watched him drive away into the dusk. That night, After she had eaten, and after the wood stove was warm again, and after the lantern was lit, she pulled her crate chair into the center of the room and stood on it. She lifted her old hammer, the one with the worn rubber grip Silas had given her in October. She tapped gently on the clean section of ceiling boards. The sound came back hollow. Behind these boards there was a space. She tapped the boards on either side. The sound came back solid. There was insulation behind them. Rot. Old fill. But behind the clean section there was nothing. She climbed down. She set the hammer aside. She stood for a long time in the center of her main room looking up. She thought of Edmund Hartwell, although she did not yet know his name. She did not yet know whose initials, E.H., she would find scorched into the heart of the central ceiling beam when 2 days later she finally pried up the first board. She only knew that her $5 house had a hidden compartment in its ceiling. She climbed back up onto the crate. She braced herself against the beam. She set the claw of the hammer beneath the edge of the first clean board. She pulled. The board groaned. The board came up. Behind it, in the cold, dark hollow, between the ceiling and the patched roof, sat a small wooden crate, square, perhaps 2 feet on each side. Wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, the cloth now dark with age but unrotted perfectly, preserved by the dry hollow in the cold. On the side of the crate, branded into the wood with the careful straight strokes of a hot iron, were 5 characters: E.H., 1871. Adelaide Thornwood stood on a crate in the middle of her main room and looked at the crate above her head, and for a very long moment she did not move at all. Then, very carefully, with both arms, she lifted the small, heavy crate down into her hands. She set it on the floor. She sat on the floor beside it. The lantern light fell yellow on the old oilcloth. She did not even then open it. She did not understand yet what she had. She only understood that something had been hidden and that the hiding had been done with care by a person who had wanted what was inside to survive, a person who had not herself been allowed to survive. She thought again of Harlan, of his quiet hands, of the way he had built his bridges, of the way he had hidden the deed to this house in the legal language of a will so dense that her 2 children, for all their education, had never noticed what their father had quietly preserved for her. She thought of how things in this world were sometimes hidden in order to be found by the right person at the right time. She unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside, neatly packed, were 6 leather-bound journals, hundreds of pressed botanical specimens sealed between heavy sheets of acid-free paper she could not believe had been available in 1871, detailed pen and ink drawings of plants and small mammals, the lines as fine as engraving. She lifted the topmost journal. The leather of the cover was cracked but intact. She opened it carefully. On the first page, in the careful, sloping handwriting of an educated 19th century hand, she read, "Edmund Hartwell, Field Notes, New England Flora, begun June 1871. She turned the page. She began to read. She did not stop reading until the lantern began to fail, almost 3 hours later. By then, her hands were trembling, but not from cold. By then, she had read enough to understand in outline what she was holding. Edmund Hartwell, she would learn fully in the days to come, had been a British naturalist of significant reputation who had come to America in 1869. He had been particularly interested in medicinal plants. He had believed the forests of northern New England held species whose pharmacological value had not yet been understood by science. He had built a small cottage somewhere in the deep Vermont woods, away from what he called the interference of those who would commercialize my discoveries. He had worked there alone for 3 years. He had disappeared in the winter of 1874. His body had never been found. His journals and specimens had been considered the great lost work of 19th century American natural history. For, 145 years, until tonight. Adelaide closed the journal. She wrapped it again gently in the oilcloth. She put it back inside the crate with the others. She sat in the dim lantern light. Outside, the cold December wind moved through the pines. Inside, the wood stove ticked. The patched roof, double-layered now in plastic and wood, did not let in any snow. She thought of Roland Kessler. She thought of his offer of $75,000 for 2.3 acres of timberland that everyone but he considered worthless. She thought of the boot print on her porch. She thought of the tire tracks in the storm. She thought of her son. The picture that had been only an outline before was filling in now. Not completely, not yet, but the shape of it was becoming clearer. A man with money very specifically interested in this piece of land. A son who had moved to take his mother's house with paperwork dated weeks before the conversation. A bidder at an auction who had raised his hand and then, looking down at a file, had decided not to bid against a 70-year-old woman whose total resources were $5. There was something here. There was something here that her son knew and Roland Kessler knew and she had not yet known. Something that had nothing to do in the end with Edmund Hartwell's journals. She did not know yet what it was, but she had a name now. She had two names. She had Roland Kessler. She had Edmund Hartwell. She had her crate. She knew immediately that she would not tell Silas. Not yet. Not until she understood what the crate would mean to her and to him and to the men who had been watching her house in the dark. She climbed back up onto the chair. She slid the floorboards back into place. She tapped them down with the heel of her hand until they sat flush. She climbed down. She built up the wood stove. She sat on her mattress with the army blanket around her shoulders. She slept that night more deeply than she had slept since the 3rd of November. She slept the sleep of a woman who had found something that no one else knew she had. The first week of January passed quietly. Adelaide read. She read by lantern light each evening after her day's work was done. She read Edmund Hartwell's journals in chronological order. The handwriting was fine and difficult, and she was an old woman with old eyes, and she worked through perhaps 15 pages a night. She did not skim. She did not skip. She read the way she had taught 2 generations of college freshmen to read slowly with attention, letting each sentence finish itself before she went to the next. What she read astonished her. Edmund Hartwell had been an observer of genius. His descriptions of plant behavior were a century ahead of his time. He understood decades before the science had a name for it, that a forest was not a collection of trees, but a single interdependent organism. He described the mycelial networks beneath the soil with the wonder of a man who could not see them, but had inferred them from what the plants did. He documented species of medicinal value that by Adelaide's own knowledge had been listed as extinct in Vermont since the 1920s. He had pressed examples of them. They sat in the crate. By the night of January the 4th, Adelaide had begun to understand in a way Roland Kessler did not yet understand, and her son did not yet understand, that what was buried in her ceiling was worth more than any acre of granite or timber. She was on the floor of her main room on a Saturday night with the 3rd journal open in her lap when she heard the engine. It was just after 11. The engine was the same engine, the careful, low, expensive idol of the Range Rover. It stopped on the road perhaps a quarter mile from her clearing. The engine cut. She set down the journal. She turned down the lantern until the flame was a sliver. She put on her coat. She picked up the iron poker. She did not move toward the door. She moved toward the kitchen. The kitchen had a small trap door in the floor that led down to a tiny stone-walled root cellar. She had discovered the cellar in her 3rd week and had not until now found a use for it. She lifted the trap door. She set the crate with all 6 journals carefully repacked in their oilcloth and the specimens cushioned between layers of her own clothes into the cellar. She closed the cellar door. She dragged the small kitchen table over it. She set a pot of water on top of the table to wait it. She arranged everything to look exactly as if she had simply gone to bed for the night. Then she heard the glass break. It was the kitchen window, the window she had sealed with her own hands in late November with woven branches and creek clay. The glass had been Verna's gift, a salvaged single pane Verna had brought one Tuesday in December. Adelaide had set it carefully into the rebuilt frame and weatherized it with strips of old wool. It broke now in a single sharp report, not the loud crash of a thrown brick, the careful contained crack of a man who had wrapped a tool in cloth and tapped the glass exactly hard enough to break it exactly soft enough not to wake anyone who was sleeping. She stood very still in the dark hallway between the kitchen and the main room. A flashlight beam came through the broken window. It moved. She saw the silhouette of a hand reach in through the empty frame, careful of the broken edges, and unlatch the simple hook she had used to secure the kitchen door from the inside. She saw the door, the back door, the door she rarely used, swing slowly inward. A figure stepped into her kitchen. He was a man, not large, not small. He wore dark clothes and a black wool cap and gloves. He carried the flashlight low near his hip, the way a professional carries a light when he does not want to advertise himself. He played the beam slowly across the kitchen. He did not turn it toward the hallway. He moved to the cupboards. He opened them one at a time with the careful, soundless economy of a man who had done this before. He looked at the cans of Verna's discounted soup. He looked at the bag of rice. He closed each cupboard exactly as he had found it. He moved into the main room. He did not see Adelaide in the dark hallway. She was still. She was small. She was in her dark coat against the dark wall, a part of the house. He swept the beam across the main room. He looked at her crude bookshelves. He looked at her mattress. He looked at her wood stove. He moved the beam across the ceiling. He moved it across the floor. He stopped at the section of the ceiling above the center of the main room, the section of clean lighter wood, the section that no longer had the dark stain of the other boards because she had pried up those boards and laid them back down 2 weeks before. He looked at it for a very long time. Then he looked up at it from directly below. He climbed onto her crate chair exactly as she had climbed onto it on December 19th. He tapped the ceiling. The hollow sound came back to him. Adelaide's grip on the iron poker tightened. He stood on the chair with his head tilted back. He played the flashlight along the seams of the boards. He examined the patterns of the dust on the floor below. Then he stepped down. He looked at the floor for a long time. He stood in the center of the main room of Adelaide Thornwood's house, and he turned a slow, careful circle, and the beam of his flashlight passed exactly across the spot where the dark hallway met the main room, exactly across the spot where a 70-year-old woman in a dark coat stood pressed against a dark wall holding an iron poker. The beam passed over her. The beam stopped. The beam came back. For perhaps a quarter of a second, the light fell directly on her face. She did not move. The man on the other end of the flashlight did not move either. In her old librarian's mind, Adelaide had time in that quarter second to register many things: the shape of his head under the cap, the set of his shoulders, the fact that he was not Roland Kessler, the fact that he had no weapon in his hand other than the flashlight, the fact that he had thought the house was empty, the fact that he had now seen that it was not. She lifted the iron poker, not high, not threatening, just enough to be visible in the light. "Get out of my house," she said. Her voice surprised her. It was not the voice of a frightened woman. It was the voice of a woman who had survived a hard winter on her own hands, and a son's betrayal, and a night when she had nearly frozen to death, and 3 months of being underestimated by men who should have known better. The man on the other end of the flashlight did not speak. He moved. He moved fast. Not toward her, toward the kitchen door. He crossed the main room in 4 long strides. He went through the kitchen. He went through the open back door. He did not slow down. He did not pick up anything. He did not look back. She heard him cross the yard. She heard him crash through the pines. No longer careful, no longer professional, moving like a man who had been seen and who did not want to be seen any further. She heard half a minute later the engine of the Range Rover, 1/4 of a mile down the road, start and pull away, gravel spraying. Silence came back. Adelaide stood in the dark hallway with the iron poker in her hand for a long time before she could make her legs move. When she could move, she did 3 things. She walked to the kitchen. She closed the back door. She propped a chair against it. She walked into the main room. She sat down on her mattress. She did not light the lantern again that night, and she said aloud to the empty room and to the wood stove and to the patched roof above her head and to the small, heavy crate hidden in the dark of the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. "Tomorrow," she said, "I am calling someone." She did not yet know whom she would call, but she knew now that her time of waiting was over. The picture she had been trying to see, the picture whose outline had been forming since November the 3rd, was almost clear. She would have to break the silence now. She would have to bring in a stranger. She would have to begin, for the first time since her husband had died, to trust. Outside, somewhere in the pine woods, an owl called twice. Adelaide Thornwood pulled the army blanket around her shoulders and waited for the long Vermont night to end. Morning came pale and slow over Timber Ridge Road. Adelaide Thornwood had not slept. She had sat upright on her mattress with the iron poker across her knees and the army blanket around her shoulders, and she had watched the sky outside the broken kitchen window go from black to charcoal to the cold gray of a Vermont January dawn. The wood stove had burned down twice. Twice she had fed it. Twice she had returned to the same place on the mattress and the same position with the same poker. When the first light came, she stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She looked at the broken pane she had sealed in November, the glass on the floor, the unlatched back door, the careful professional nature of the break-in, which had no signature of a desperate man, only the quiet signature of a man who had been hired. She swept up the glass. She nailed a square of plywood Silas had left over the empty frame. She did this not because she expected the man to come back that morning. She did this because a woman who has been violated in her own house needs very badly to put the house back in order before she can think clearly about anything else. When the plywood was up, she sat down at the small kitchen table. She took out her 90-cent notebook. She wrote in the careful block letters of an old librarian 3 names: Roland Kessler, Edmund Hartwell, Garrett. She underlined the 3rd name. She had been avoiding that line in the picture she had been assembling for nearly 2 months. She had been avoiding it because it was the line that hurt the most, and because some part of her, the mother part, had been waiting, in spite of everything, for it to turn out to be a line she did not have to draw. She drew it now. She drew it because the man in her house the night before had been a professional, and professionals cost money, and the money had to come from somewhere, and the only people in the world who had a reason to want a piece of timberland on Timber Ridge Road badly enough to send a professional to look for a hidden compartment in a ceiling were Roland Kessler and the people who had told Roland Kessler that the ceiling was worth looking at. Roland Kessler had not been at the auction by accident. Roland Kessler had known to come. Someone had told him. She did not yet know who, but she had narrowed the world of possible tellers in the long gray hours of that morning to a very small number, and one of those numbers was her son. She closed the notebook. She walked the 5 miles to Verna Holloway's store. She arrived at 5 in the morning. She mopped, she swept, she stocked the shelves, At 8, before she walked the 5 miles home, she did something she had not done in 18 years. She made a phone call. The phone was the old yellow landline Verna kept on the wall behind the cash register. Adelaide dropped 2 quarters into the small jar Verna kept beside it and picked up the receiver. She dialed the operator. She asked for directory assistance. She asked for the home number of a man named Bram Sullivan in Burlington. Bram Sullivan had been the head of campus security at the University of Vermont for 22 years. He had retired in 2016 at the age of 58. Before that, he had been a Burlington police detective for 15 years. Adelaide had known him casually during her last decade at the library. He had attended her retirement party. He had eaten a piece of her sheet cake. He had told her on his way out that if she ever needed anything at all, she should call him. She had thought that day that it was the kind of thing people said. She had remembered 3 months later that it was the kind of thing Bram Sullivan did not say. The operator gave her the number. She dialed it. He picked up on the second ring. "Sullivan." "Bram," she said. "This is Adelaide Thornwood from the library." There was a pause, not a long one, a pause of recognition and of memory. "Mrs. Thornwood," he said, "I heard about your house." She did not ask which house. She understood that in a town this size, everyone had heard about both. "I need to hire you," she said. "I'd like to discuss it in person, today if possible." "Where are you?" "At Verna Holloway's store, out past Bear Hollow." "I know the place. I can be there in 40 minutes. "All right." "And Bram." "Yes, ma'am." "Come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." There was a longer pause this time, the pause of a man who had been a detective long enough to recognize on the other end of a phone line the voice of a person who had begun to understand something that frightened them. "All right," he said. "I'll come alone." He arrived in 36 minutes. Bram Sullivan was a heavy man of 60 with gray hair cut close to the skull and a face that had been weathered by 20 Vermont winters of standing outside on second shift patrol. He wore a dark canvas jacket and work boots and the patient, watchful expression of a man who had spent his life learning to listen to what people said with their hands and their shoulders, not with their words. He drove Adelaide back to her $5 house in his own truck. They did not speak on the way. She did not yet know him well enough to begin, and he had the wisdom not to ask. She showed him the house. She showed him the patch windows and the mortared floor and the wood stove. She showed him the broken kitchen window and the prop chair against the back door. She showed him the boot print on the porch. Then she sat him down at the small kitchen table and she told him everything. She told him about Harlan's death, about the quitclaim deed in May, about the document dated October the 12th, about the auction, about Roland Kessler's hand half raised in the bidding, about the engine that had come up the road twice on her first night, about the tire tracks in the storm, about the $75,000, about the man last night who had stood on her crate chair and tapped at her ceiling. She did not tell him about Edmund Hartwell. She had decided during the long night that she would not tell anyone about the journals until she understood why people were looking for them. Bram Sullivan listened the way a detective listens, which is the way certain librarians listen, which is the way certain priests listen. He did not interrupt. He did not take notes. When she was finished, he sat for a long moment looking at the wood grain of the kitchen table. "Mrs. Thornwood," he said, "I'd like to be honest with you. What you've described is not a real estate dispute. I know. It's a pattern. I know. Heritage Land Partners. You're sure about the name? Silas Buchanan got it for me. I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Here's what I think. I think your son's involvement in this is something we need to understand before we make any further moves. If he is involved, then anything you do publicly, Anything you do legally, any complaint to the police, any conversation with the press will get back to him before the ink is dry. And if it gets back to him, it gets back to Kessler. And if it gets back to Kessler, the man who came into your house last night will be the least of your problems. I understand. What I'd like to do, with your permission, is move quietly. I want to look at Heritage Land Partners. I want to look at every parcel they've bought in this county in the last 3 years. I want to look at the public records on every shell entity they've used. I want to look at the will your husband left and the deed transfer you signed in May. I want to look at your son's business associations. I want to look at everything that connects, and I want to do all of it before anyone knows I'm looking. How long? 3 months, maybe 4. What do you charge? He smiled just slightly. Mrs. Thornwood, the university library kept my daughter's reading list current for 11 years. I'm not going to charge you. Bram, you can pay me when this is over. You can pay me out of whatever you have left. We'll settle then. She looked at him. She did not argue. All right, she said, but there's one more thing. There's something in this house I haven't told you about yet. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Not yet. I want you to look at the public side of this first without that thing in your head. I want to know what you find when you look only at the people. I'll show you the other thing when you've finished. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. I'll work blind. He stood up. He shook her hand. He drove away. She watched his truck disappear down the gravel track, and for the first time in many weeks, she felt the small, particular lightness of a burden shared. The work began. Bram Sullivan was, Adelaide would learn over the months that followed, a methodical man. He came every Sunday afternoon alone in his own truck. He brought each time a manila folder. The folder began thin. Over the weeks it grew. In late January, he brought her the deed history of every parcel Heritage Land Partners had acquired in Chittenden County between the spring of 2017 and the auction of November 2019. There were 11 parcels in all. Every one of them sat within a 4-mile radius of Adelaide's $5 house. Every one of them had been acquired through a Shell LLC. Every Shell LLC traced eventually back to a single Boston-based holding company whose senior partner was Roland Kessler. In February, he brought her the corporate filings. Heritage Land Partners had an unusual structure. It had a CEO, it had a chief operating officer, and it had a small advisory board, 3 names long, of consultants who had been retained for expertise in commercial real estate development and regional market intelligence. The first name on the advisory board was a man Adelaide had never heard of, a Boston attorney named Westbrook. The second name was a woman from Hartford named Lillian Vance, a consultant in commercial property law. The third name was Garrett Thornwood. Adelaide sat for a long time looking at her son's name on the page. She had been expecting it. She had been bracing for it. But seeing it printed in serif type on a corporate filing was a different thing from suspecting it. Seeing it made it permanent. Seeing it made the picture finally complete. Bram watched her face. He did not speak. How long has he been on this board? She asked. Since June of 2018. She set the paper down. She folded her hands on the table. 18 months, she said. 18 months. She thought about that, about the math of it, about what June of 2018 had been. It had been the month her son and his wife had visited her on Cedar Street for a long weekend. The month Garrett had spent 2 afternoons in Harlan's old workshop in the garage. The month he had sat at her kitchen table and had asked her casually over coffee whether his father had left any other property to her in the will, anything he had said beside the house. She had told him no. She had told him no because she had believed it. She had believed it because Harlan had told her 2 weeks before he died that the house on Cedar Street was the only property she would inherit. He had said it kindly. He had said it definitely. He had said, "Don't worry about anything else, Addie. There isn't anything else." She had believed her husband. Her husband, she now understood, had not been telling her the whole truth. Her husband had been protecting her. "Bram," she said, "yes, there's something I want you to look at about my husband's family, about anything they may have owned, land, in Vermont, from before. How far back?" "As far as you can go." He nodded. He wrote something in his notebook. He stood up. He left. He came back the next Sunday with the answer. The answer was that Harlan Thornwood's grandfather, a man named Augustus Thornwood, had purchased 2.3 acres of timberland in 1924 from a defunct estate. The land had passed to Harlan's father in 1951. The land had passed to Harlan in 1978. The land had been held in Harlan's name separately from the Cedar Street property ever since. The land had never been listed on the joint marital property inventory because under Vermont law, inherited land remains separate property unless the spouse formally co-titles it. The land was the land on Timber Ridge Road. The land was hers now, by the will, by the small, careful single line Harlan had inserted into the will on the second-to-last page, a line her children had skimmed over, because it had been written in the dry legalese. Harlan had paid his attorney to use a line that read, "All real property of the testator, not specifically devised herein, shall pass in fee simple to the testator's spouse, Adelaide M. Thornwood." The land was hers, and the county had no record of it being hers because Harlan had paid the property tax through a small Burlington account she had not known about, and the deed had never been retitled, and the land had sat there in the records of the town clerk's office in Underhill in the name of a man dead for 3 years. A man dead for 3 years whose son was on the advisory board of a company that had been buying every parcel within 4 miles of that land for the last 2 years. Adelaide did not weep when Bram explained this to her. She had thought for a long time over the winter that she had used up her weeping. She had not. But what came sitting at her kitchen table while Bram laid the documents out in front of her like a hand of cards was not weeping. It was a small, clean ache that started in the center of her chest and moved outward. The ache was the ache of finally understanding. Her husband had hidden the land from their children. He had hidden it because on his deathbed he had suspected something about them that she had not suspected. He had hidden it the way some men hide a savings account because he had understood before she had that the wolf was already inside the house. She thought of his quiet hands, of the bridges he had built, of the way he had measured twice and spoken once. "He knew," she said aloud. Bram looked at her. He knew about Garrett, about what Garrett was. "Maybe not the specifics," Bram said, "but yes, I think he knew something." She nodded slowly. She turned the document toward herself. She read the line her husband had written one more time. She closed the folder. "Now," she said, "I want to show you what I haven't shown you yet." She took him to the main room. She climbed onto her crate chair. She pried up the floorboards from above. She lowered the small, heavy crate wrapped in oilcloth into Bram Sullivan's hands. She watched his face change as she unwrapped the journals. She told him about Edmund Hartwell, about the missing 1874 work, about the journals, about the specimens, about what Dr. Imogen Ashford, whom she had not yet contacted, would almost certainly say when she saw what was inside this crate. "Mrs. Thornwood," Bram said. He said it very quietly. "Yes, this changes things." "It does. What Heritage Land Partners thinks they're buying, the granite under the soil, the mineral rights, the commercial value, that's not what this property is." "No, this property is something else entirely." "Yes." He looked at her. He looked at the journals. He looked at her again. What do you want to do? She thought about this. She had been thinking about it, in fact, for many weeks. I want to do 3 things, she said. I want the journals authenticated, publicly, by a credentialed institution, so that if anything happens to me, the existence of what's in this crate is on the record, and the historical importance of this house cannot be denied by any party with a financial interest in saying it isn't here. Yes, I want the case against Kessler and my son built quietly and thoroughly on the public record while they continue to believe I know nothing. Yes, and when both of those things are ready, I want to give the case to the federal government, not the state, not the local police, the federal government, because what these men have done with shell companies and interstate wire fraud and bid rigging at a county auction is a federal matter. Bram looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Thornwood, he said, I have to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly. All right, why not just sell the house, take the money, walk away, let it go? She thought about the question. She gave it the answer it deserved. Because if I walk away, she said, I walk away as the woman my children threw out. I would rather walk forward as the woman who would not be thrown out. Bram nodded. All right, he said. Then we work. She called Dr. Imogen Ashford in the 2nd week of March. Dr. Ashford was a botanist at the University of Vermont, specializing in historical plant studies. Adelaide had known her distantly from the years when Dr. Ashford had checked out reference materials at the university library. Adelaide had once helped her track down an obscure 1888 monograph on northeastern fern species. Dr. Ashford had remembered. She drove out to the $5 house on a Saturday morning. She was a woman of 53, lean, gray-haired, with the kind of sharp, focused eyes that had spent decades looking at very small things. She came expecting Adelaide could tell to be politely disappointed. The expectation lasted about 4 minutes. By the 7th minute, Dr. Ashford had stopped speaking. She was kneeling on Adelaide's floor with the first journal open on her knee and a cotton glove on her right hand and an expression on her face that Adelaide had seen once before in 1989 on the face of a graduate student who had opened a 1641 edition of Galileo's Discorsi at the library reference desk. By the 20th minute, Dr. Ashford had stopped looking at the journals and had begun very carefully to examine the pressed specimens. She did this with a small magnifying loupe she carried in a leather case. By the 35th minute, she sat back on her heels and looked at Adelaide. Mrs. Thornwood, she said, yes, this is the Hartwell collection. I believe it is. It cannot be the Hartwell collection. And yet, Dr. Ashford did not speak for almost a minute. This is the most significant find in American botanical history in 50 years, she finally said. Maybe in 100. I am not exaggerating. I am not being a colleague trying to flatter a stranger. I am telling you as a working scientist that the specimens in this crate include at least 4 species that were declared extinct in Vermont between 1923 and 1941. The pressed examples in this box are the only physical record of those species in existence anywhere in the world. What do they need? Adelaide said. To be protected. Climate control, acid-free containment, photographic documentation, catalog entries. They need to be authenticated by an independent panel, and the authentication needs to be on the public record. The university would do this in 2 weeks if you let us. I'll let you. And the house. What about the house? The house, Mrs. Thornwood, is itself part of the find. If we can demonstrate that this is the original Hartwell cottage, that this is the structure he wrote about in the journals, that this is the place where the work was done, then the house qualifies for Vermont State Historical Landmark designation under Section 36. That designation comes with restoration grants. It comes with protection. It would be very difficult after that designation for anyone to argue that this property should be sold, redeveloped, or in any way disturbed. How difficult? Functionally impossible. Adelaide nodded. Then I would like to pursue the designation, she said, quickly and quietly. Dr. Ashford looked at her. There's something you're not telling me. Yes. Is it dangerous? It has been. Dr. Ashford set the loop back in its case. She closed the first journal. She looked at Adelaide for a long time, and then, with the small business-like efficiency of a woman who had spent her life around scientific procedure, she said, I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. Thank you. And Mrs. Thornwood. Yes, you should know, if this collection is what I think it is, if the historical designation goes through, the financial value of what is sitting in this room in publication rights, in research grants, in museum partnerships is somewhere between $2 and $4 million over the next decade. To you, to the property, to whatever foundation or trust you choose to establish. Adelaide did not speak. She had not until that moment thought of the journals in those terms. She thought of them now. She thought of her son, of Roland Kessler, of $75,000 offered for a piece of land that, with what was hidden in its ceiling, was worth 50 times that amount. She thought of how small a man's imagination could be when his eye was only on the granite beneath the soil. Dr. Ashford, she said, yes, please do not put a dollar figure on this in any document I have to sign. Not yet, not until I tell you. Why? Because I want certain people to continue thinking that this house is worth $75,000 for a little while longer. Dr. Ashford looked at her. She understood Adelaide could see that she had walked into something more complicated than a botanical find. All right, she said, I'll wait for your word. Spring came late to Timber Ridge Road that year, the way it does some years in Vermont. The historical designation came through on the 22nd of April. It came with grant money, $180,000, administered through the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. It came with a contractor. It came with restoration architects. It came with a small, discreet sign that read, Edmund Hartwell Cottage, assessed 1871, which the state installed at the foot of the dirt track in May. By June, real workers were rebuilding her house. They put a real roof on it. They put real glass in the windows. They poured a real concrete reinforcement on the failing stone foundation. They left the original old-growth timber frame, which had survived 150 years of weather exactly as it was. They left the wood stove in the kitchen. They left the carved beam with EH 1871 burned into it, visible in the ceiling of the main room, lit now by a small museum-grade gallery light. A climate-controlled case appeared in what had been the bedroom. The journals went into the case. The original specimens went with them. Adelaide stayed in the house through all of it. She slept in the room she would soon have as her bedroom, which by July had real plaster on the walls and a real bed and a real lamp she could turn on with a switch. She watched the house she had saved with her hands transform around her into the house Harlan had hidden for her in his will. She did not tell Garrett. She did not tell Camilla. She did not, in fact, communicate with either of her children at any point during the winter, the spring, or the summer of 2020. Bram Sullivan, meanwhile, continued his quiet work. By August, he had what he needed. He had email records retrieved through subpoena-friendly preservation between Garrett Thornwood and Roland Kessler going back to August of 2017. He had a geological survey commissioned by Heritage Land Partners in November of 2017 that documented an unusual deposit of high-grade architectural granite running beneath the Timber Ridge parcel, with an estimated commercial extraction value of $17 million over 20 years. He had a memo dated February of 2018 from Garrett Thornwood to Roland Kessler, outlining what Garrett described as the family management strategy for securing the parcel. The strategy was simple. Step 1, convince Adelaide to quitclaim the Cedar Street house, transferring control of her primary residence to the children. Step 2, persuade her over the following year to enter an assisted living facility. Step 3, once Adelaide was institutionalized, locate and acquire any inherited property held in Harlan's name. Step 4, sell the inherited property to Heritage Land Partners at a family discount price. The memo had been written in clean prose. It had not used the word mother once. Bram had also obtained, through entirely lawful means, a recording of a phone conversation between Roland Kessler and a Boston associate dated November the 15th, 2019, in which Kessler said, "She bought it. Get a car." He had obtained records showing that the man in the dark clothes who had broken Adelaide's kitchen window had been Mark Cordray, a Boston private security contractor with 2 prior assault convictions and 3 contracts with shell companies traceable to Kessler. He had obtained the auctioneer's records from the November the 15th auction, showing that Howard Pickett had received an unusual phone call from a Boston number at 1:53 in the afternoon, 12 minutes before bidding began. Bram brought all of this to Adelaide in a brown accordion folder in early September. She read for 3 hours at her kitchen table in silence. When she was done, she set down the last page. "What now?" Bram said. "Now we send it to Burlington, FBI field office." "Yes, they will move very fast on this, Mrs. Thornwood. Wire fraud, auction rigging, conspiracy, trespass, possibly attempted murder if we can get the medical records from the storm. Once they have it, they will move within 2 or 3 weeks. I want them to move on November the 15th. He looked at her. "That's 2 months away." "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because that's the anniversary," she said. He understood. He did not ask anything else. "All right," he said. "I'll set the timing." October passed slowly. The leaves on the maples around Adelaide's house turned the deep rust and gold of a Vermont autumn. The contractors finished their final restoration work in the 2nd week. A small stream of visiting researchers, vetted by Dr. Ashford, began to arrive to view the Hartwell collection. The state paid Adelaide a monthly stipend as the official caretaker of the historical site. Verna kept her on at her own insistence for the 3 morning shifts a week at the camp store, because Adelaide had decided that whatever else changed in her life, she would continue to mop a floor that needed mopping when she had agreed to mop it. She gained the weight back. Her face filled in. Her hair, which she had cut herself in February with a pair of kitchen scissors, was now trimmed properly by a woman in town who came to the house. The calluses on her hands softened but did not disappear. She did not want them to. On the 14th of November, a Saturday, Bram Sullivan came to the house with a final folder. He laid it on the kitchen table. "The Bureau took the case," he said. "Officially, as of this morning, the indictments are sealed. They will be unsealed Monday. Monday is the 16th. Yes, I asked you for the 15th. I know. The Bureau wanted a normal business day. There was no moving them. The indictments will be unsealed on Monday morning. The arrests will be made simultaneously. Kessler in Boston, 3 of his associates in Boston, and Hartford. Your son will be served a federal subpoena that morning to appear before a grand jury." She nodded slowly. "They're coming tomorrow," she said. He looked at her. "Your children." "Yes. They called Silas's store yesterday looking for me. They want to come see me. They want to talk." "Did you agree?" I agreed. Adelaide, it's the 15th Bram. They will come tomorrow. They will sit in my living room. And on Monday morning, the indictments will unseal. I want them to sit in my living room on the 15th, exactly 1 year after they put me on a curb, and I want them to do it without knowing what is going to happen Monday. Bram looked at her for a long moment. You are not the woman they think you are, he said. I haven't been, she said, for a long time. They came at 1 o'clock on Sunday, the 15th of November, 2020. A black Lexus SUV pulled into Adelaide's clearing. The car was new. The plates were Massachusetts. Garrett got out from the driver's side. Camilla got out from the passenger side. They were both dressed in the careful, casual clothes of people who had thought on the drive up very carefully about what they should wear. Adelaide watched them from the porch. The porch was new, rebuilt. The boards were tight and clean. Around her, the house stood in its restored form, the chimney straight, the windows whole, the small bronze plaque beside the door reading Edmund Hartwell, Cottage National Register of Historic Places. Garrett and Camilla approached the porch slowly. Their faces were the faces of children who had read the local newspaper and the regional newspaper and the small academic press release that had been issued in May, and who had understood in the months since that the mother they had left on a curb a year before had become something they had not expected her to become. She waited for them to climb the porch steps. She did not invite them in. Mom, Garrett said. Garrett, you look well. I am well. There was a silence. Camilla broke it. Mom, we know how this looks. Showing up after a year. After a year, we know. We're not going to pretend. We came because we want to talk to you. We want to try to begin again. Adelaide looked at her daughter. She looked at her son. She did not move from her position in front of the door. All right, she said. Talk. Garrett took a breath. This is beautiful, he said, gesturing at the house. What you've done here, it's remarkable. We've been reading about it. We've been so proud of you. And we've been talking, the two of us, about how things ended last year, about how we handled it. We were wrong, Mom. We know we were wrong. We were stressed. We made decisions that were what? Were inhumane. There's no other word for it. And we want to apologize. We want to ask for the chance to begin again. Adelaide did not respond. Camilla pressed forward. And, Mom, listen. We're not just here to apologize. We're here because we have something we want to offer. We've spoken with a buyer, a very generous private buyer. He's offering $1.8 million for the property. As is, he understands the historical designation. He's prepared to maintain it. He's willing to work with the state. With that money, you could move to a beautiful condominium in Boston, near us. We could see you every week. We could be a family again. We could. Adelaide held up her hand. Camilla stopped. There was a long quiet on the porch. From the woods a crow called once and was answered. His name is Roland Kessler, Adelaide said. The blood went out of Garrett's face. It went out in the specific way that confirms more clearly than any words that the person standing in front of you knows something they should not be able to know. What did you say? Camilla said. His name is Roland Kessler, Heritage Land Partners. The same Roland Kessler who started to bid on this property at the auction last year and then stopped. The same Roland Kessler who has been buying every parcel of land within 4 miles of this house for the last 2 years. The same Roland Kessler who is on the corporate filings of Heritage Land Partners alongside your brother. Camilla turned and looked at Garrett. It was a small turn. It was less than a quarter of a turn of her head. But Adelaide saw it, and Garrett saw it, and the small movement carried in that 1 second, the whole architecture of what had been between the two of them collapsing in real time. Camilla, Garrett said. You told me, Camilla said. You told me it was a real estate development. You told me it was clean. It is clean. He says his name, she says his name, Garrett, Camilla, listen to me. Don't. Adelaide stepped forward. She stepped forward the way a woman steps forward when she has been waiting a very long time to take exactly one step, and she has decided that the step she takes now will be the step that her children remember for the rest of their lives. There's a geological survey, she said, from November of 2017, commissioned by Heritage Land Partners. It documents $17 million in commercial granite beneath this property. There's a memo from February of 2018 written by Garrett to Roland Kessler describing what Garrett calls the family management strategy. That strategy was to convince me to quit claim the Cedar Street house, then to persuade me to enter an assisted living facility, then to identify and acquire any inherited land held in your father's name, then to sell that inherited land to Heritage Land Partners at a family discount. That memo doesn't use the word mother once. Camilla had taken one step away from Garrett. She had taken it without realizing she had taken it. Garrett's face had become very still. Mom, I'm not finished, Garrett. Mom, please. There are email records going back to August of 2017. There are recorded phone calls. There is a man named Mark Cordray who broke a window in my kitchen on the 4th of January of this year and stood on a chair in my living room and tapped my ceiling looking for a hidden compartment who works for Roland Kessler and has been paid through 3 shell companies you helped set up. There is the matter of the storm on December the 18th, the night the roof came off this house, when a vehicle whose tire tracks Silas Buchanan, photographed and identified by tread pattern, came up the road, stopped 50 feet from this front door for 10 minutes, and drove away without ever checking on whether the 70-year-old woman inside was still alive. Camilla's hand had risen to her mouth. That vehicle was a Range Rover Garrett. Roland Kessler drives a Range Rover, and so do you. She let that sit. I have everything, she said. I have all of it. I gave it to a retired Burlington detective in January, and he has been working it for 9 months. The FBI has had the file since September. The indictments are sealed at the federal courthouse in Burlington. They will unseal tomorrow morning. Garrett opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. You're bluffing, he said. I am not bluffing. You can't. Tomorrow morning, Garrett, at 9, Roland Kessler will be arrested at his office on Beacon Street. 3 of his associates will be arrested in Boston and Hartford. You will be served a federal subpoena to appear before a grand jury in Burlington. Whether you go from witness to defendant depends entirely on what you do between tomorrow at 9 and the date of your testimony, and that is a conversation you should have with a lawyer you do not currently have, because the family lawyer you have used for 15 years is also Roland Kessler's family lawyer, and he is currently asleep in Brookline. Camilla had begun to cry. Adelaide looked at her daughter. I'm sorry, Camilla. You're sorry. I'm sorry that I am the one who has to tell you. I had hoped very much that your brother had not pulled you into this. I see now in the last 60 seconds that he had not. That is a small mercy. You should take it. You should also call a lawyer this evening. Not Garrett's, not your father's old friend in Hartford. A real lawyer, in a different city. Camilla nodded. She nodded the way a person nods when they have not yet finished understanding what is happening, but have already understood enough. Mom, Garrett said. Yes, Garrett. Whatever you have, whatever it shows, there is an interpretation of these documents that is different from the interpretation you have just. Garrett. Yes, Mom. No. He stopped. There is no interpretation, she said. I have read the memo. I have read the emails. I have read the geological survey. I have heard the recording of Mr. Kessler telling his associate on the day of the auction, she bought it. Get a car. There is no interpretation. There is only what you did. She paused. "And there is one more thing you should know." He waited. "I have transferred all of my present and future assets into an irrevocable charitable trust, effective in June. The trust is administered by Silas Buchanan, Verna Holloway, and Dr. Imogen Ashford. The trust funds the preservation of this house, the publication of Edmund Hartwell's journals, and a modest annual scholarship at the University of Vermont in your father's name. Neither you nor your sister are beneficiaries. You will inherit nothing from me, not when I die, not before. There is nothing for either of you to wait for, and there is nothing for any creditor of yours to attach. That door is closed." Garrett's face did something Adelaide had never seen on her son's face. It did the thing that the human face does when a person has, for the first time in adult life, run out of strategies. He took a step back. He did not say anything else. Camilla turned and walked slowly back down the porch steps. She walked to the passenger side of the Lexus. She got in. She closed the door. Garrett stood on the porch for another 5 seconds. Adelaide looked at him. "Goodbye, Garrett." He turned. He walked down the steps. He got into the Lexus. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. Then he started it. He turned the car around. He drove away down the dirt track between the pines, and the sound of the engine grew smaller and smaller and finally was gone. Adelaide stood on the porch. She did not cry. She had thought perhaps that she might. What came instead was a great and surprising stillness. It was the stillness of a long task completed. It was the stillness of a debt that after many decades had been paid. It was not joy. It was something quieter than joy. It was the feeling of a woman who had, with her own 2 hands, lifted a thing that had been crushing her and set it down. The crow called again from the woods. Adelaide turned. She walked back into her house. The arrests happened on Monday morning, as Bram had said they would. Roland Kessler was arrested in his Beacon Street office at 9:15 Eastern Standard Time. He was charged with 12 federal counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud bid rigging, and conspiracy to commit interstate trespass. He posted bail at 3 in the afternoon, $4 million, and was placed under house arrest pending trial. Mark Cordray was arrested in a motel room in Revere. He pleaded out within the week and named everyone he had ever worked for. Garrett Thornwood was served his subpoena at his Boston condominium at 9:20. He retained by the end of the day separate counsel. Within a month, his name had appeared in the corporate filings of Heritage Land Partners under the heading "Withdrawn." He resigned from 2 other boards. His firm placed him on indefinite administrative leave. By the spring of 2021, he had cooperated with the federal investigators sufficiently to avoid prosecution. He gave grand jury testimony against Roland Kessler in May. He was not in the end indicted himself. Camilla Thornwood Pierce filed for divorce from her husband in February of 2021. Her husband, it would later come out, had also been a small investor in one of the Heritage Land Shell entities. Camilla did not contest the Bar Association inquiry into her conduct. She accepted a 6-month suspension. She moved to Portland, Maine. She did not contact her mother. Roland Kessler went to trial in October of 2021. He was convicted on 9 of the 12 counts. He was sentenced in February of 2022 to 7 years in federal prison. In the 3rd week of his trial, when the verdict had become a foregone conclusion, he wrote a letter from his pre-trial confinement and had it mailed to Adelaide Thornwood at 1847 Timber Ridge Road, Underhill, Vermont. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early November of 2021. Silas Buchanan brought it from the camp store where it had been delivered by mistake. He set it on her kitchen table. "It's from him," he said. Adelaide looked at the envelope. She looked at it for perhaps half a minute. Then she picked it up. She walked to the wood stove. She opened the door of the stove. She set the unopened envelope with its careful return address from a federal pretrial facility in Plymouth, Massachusetts, on top of the burning logs. The paper curled. It blackened. It caught. It was gone in 12 seconds. She closed the door of the wood stove. "Some chapters," she said, "are closed." Silas nodded. He poured 2 cups of tea from the kettle on her stove. He set one in front of her. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table. Outside the kitchen window, the late afternoon light was the gold light of a Vermont November, falling slant across the cleared trees of the clearing, falling on the new shingles of the Edmund Hartwell cottage, falling on the small bronze plaque beside the door. Adelaide Thornwood, 72 years old, took a sip of her tea. She thought of Harlan, of his quiet hands, of his last good afternoon when he had taken her hand in his lighter than it should have been hand and had asked her to make him a promise to not let anyone take this house from her. He had not been talking, she understood now, about the house on Cedar Street. He had been talking about the house she would find. She had found it. She had saved it. She had filled it. Her book, The $5 House, would be published by a small Vermont press in the spring. It would go on against everyone's expectations, including Adelaide's, to spend 14 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Its proceeds, by the terms of the trust she had created, would fund the preservation of the Edmund Hartwell cottage in perpetuity. She did not yet know any of that on that November afternoon. She only knew that the kettle was warm and the tea was good and her friend was across the table from her, and outside her windows the last light of a November day was falling on a house that by every law of this world should not have been hers and was. She picked up her tea. She looked at Silas. She smiled, small and tired and certain. "I think," she said, "I will write a little more tomorrow." "That's good, Adelaide." "Yes," she said, "it is." Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines on Timber Ridge Road, the way it had moved on the night she had first arrived with $5 and a broken suitcase and the whole of her life ahead of her in the dark.